I was born into a world that never truly wanted me. My earliest memories are not of warmth or comfort, but of watching others belong while I remained apart, quiet, unnoticed, unwanted. I lived at Gateshead Hall in the home of my aunt by marriage, Mrs. Reed. It was a grand house, full of fine furniture, heavy curtains, and polished mirrors, yet for me it was colder than any winter night. I was not a daughter there, nor even a guest. I was an obligation, one that was never allowed to forget her place. On a bleak afternoon, when rain tapped softly against the windows and the sky hung low and gray, I found refuge in my favorite hiding place. I slipped behind the thick scarlet curtains of the window seat, drawing my knees to my chest and holding a book close to my heart. There, hidden from sharp eyes and sharper tongues, I could breathe. Books were my only friends. Within their pages, I traveled far from Gateshead to distant lands, frozen seas, and silent forests. In those worlds, loneliness was meaningful, not humiliating. Strength was admired, not punished. For a moment, I could forget who I was, but peace never lasted long. Jane Eyre, the voice cut through the room like a whip. My cousin John Reed stood before me, tall, spoiled, and cruel, his face already twisted with anger. He was older, stronger, and painfully aware of his power over me. "What are you doing there?" he demanded. I said nothing. Silence was my shield, though it rarely protected me. He stepped closer, snatched the book from my hands, and struck me with it. Pain flared, sharp and sudden, but worse than the pain was the injustice. I had done nothing wrong, still I was punished simply for existing. "You have no right to our books," he sneered. "You are dependent. You should beg, not read." Something burned inside me then, hot and wild. Fear had always lived in my chest, but that day it shared space with anger. "You are cruel," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "You are like a murderer." The room exploded into chaos. John shouted. I was struck again. Servants rushed in, not to protect me, but to restrain me as if I were the offender. No one asked why I was hurt. No one cared. Mrs. Reed entered, her face cold and unmoved. "Take her away," she said. "Lock her in the red room." The red room. Even the name made my heart race. It was a chamber rarely used, preserved like a shrine to death. It was where my uncle, Mrs. Reed's husband, had died years ago. He was the only person who had ever shown me kindness. As they dragged me down the hallway, terror wrapped itself around my throat. The door closed behind me with a heavy sound. The room was vast and silent. Red curtains, red carpet, red upholstery. A tall mirror reflected my pale face, wide-eyed and trembling. I felt smaller than ever, as if the room itself might swallow me whole. I pressed my hands to my ears, but I could not escape my thoughts. Why was I hated so deeply? What had I done to deserve this exile? My uncle's face seemed to haunt the shadows. I remembered his gentle voice, his promise to protect me. And suddenly a dreadful thought seized me. What if his spirit watched me now? What if the dead still remembered injustice? Fear overwhelmed me. I screamed, but no one came. Hours, or perhaps minutes, passed in darkness and terror until my strength gave way. The world spun and I fell into unconsciousness. When I awoke, voices murmured nearby. A doctor stood beside me, his expression kind. For the first time that day, someone looked at me with concern. "She is a sensitive child," he said. "She should be treated with more care." Mrs. Reed merely nodded, unmoved. That night I lay awake in my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. My body ached, but my heart hurt more. Something within me had changed. The fear that once ruled me was no longer alone. A quiet resolve had taken root. I would not always be powerless. Soon after, a decision was made. Mrs. Reed, tired of my presence and my spirit, arranged for me to be sent away to school. Lode Institution, a place for orphaned girls, would become my new home. When the day came, I stood at the gates of Gateshead for the last time. No one hugged me goodbye. No tears were shed for my leaving. Yet as the carriage pulled away, something unexpected stirred within me. hope. For the first time, I was leaving a place that had never loved me. Whatever waited ahead, hardship, cold, discipline, it could not be worse than living where I was despised. As the road stretched before me, I whispered a promise to myself. I would endure, I would learn, and one day I would claim a life of my own. Winter arrived at Load like an uninvited guest, silent, relentless, and cold. The school stood on a bleak stretch of land, its stone walls rising out of the mist like a warning rather than a refuge. When Jane Eyre first crossed its threshold, she was small, thin, and quiet, carrying with her not only a modest trunk of possessions, but a lifetime of restraint, grief, and unspoken courage. Load Institution promised discipline and charity. In reality, it offered deprivation disguised as moral instruction. The days began before dawn. A bell rang sharply through the dormitory, pulling the girls from shallow sleep. Jane would rise from her narrow bed, the air biting at her skin, her breath visible in pale clouds. There was no fire to warm them, no comfort to ease the morning chill. The girls dressed quickly, their fingers numb, their movements practiced through repetition rather than ease. Breakfast followed, if it could be called that. On Jane's first morning, the porridge was burnt and inedible. When the girls hesitated, murmurs rippled through the hall. The teachers watched unmoved. Hunger, Jane learned quickly, was to be endured, not questioned. Yet Jane did not complain. She observed, she listened, she learned. Load was a place where suffering was considered virtuous, where endurance was mistaken for goodness. Mr. Brocklehurst, the institution's director, appeared one morning like a dark omen. Tall, severe, clothed in black, he carried authority with him like a weapon. His voice echoed through the schoolroom as he spoke of humility and self-denial, of the dangers of vanity and pride. Jane felt his eyes settle on her. He called her forward. Before the entire school, he declared her a liar. The words struck harder than the cold ever had. Jane stood frozen, her face burning, her heart pounding as whispers filled the room. She was ordered to stand on a stool, elevated above the others, not in honor, but in disgrace. "Let this child be shunned," Brocklehurst commanded. "Let her serve as an example." Time slowed. Jane stood there for what felt like hours, her legs aching, her hands trembling. Shame pressed down on her like a weight, threatening to crush the small flame of dignity she guarded so fiercely. She longed to disappear, yet something within her refused to break. She lifted her head. In that moment, Jane did not feel weak. She felt aware. A quiet strength stirred within her, a realization that injustice, when seen clearly, loses some of its power. When she was finally allowed to return to her seat, the room felt altered. Some girls avoided her gaze. Others looked at her with curiosity, even sympathy. Among them was Helen Burns. Helen was unlike the others. Tall, gentle, with thoughtful eyes, she possessed a calm that seemed untouched by cruelty. Where Jane burned with feeling, Helen reflected. Where Jane questioned, Helen accepted. It was Helen who spoke to Jane that evening. They sat together in the dim dormitory, the sound of wind whispering through cracked windows. Helen listened as Jane poured out her grief, her anger at injustice, her yearning to be understood. Helen did not interrupt. When Jane finished, her voice trembling, Helen spoke softly. "It is not violence that best overcomes hate," she said, "nor vengeance that most certainly heals injury." Jane frowned. "But if we do not resist," she asked, "are we not encouraging cruelty?" Helen smiled sadly. "We must endure," she replied, "not because it is easy, but because it is right." Jane was unconvinced, but she was comforted. In Helen, Jane found her first true friend. Days turned into weeks. Winter deepened its grip. Snow fell heavily, sealing Load in silence. The cold became more severe, the hunger more constant. Illness crept quietly through the dormitories. Coughs echoed in the night. Faces grew pale. Strength faded. Jane watched as Helen grew weaker. Helen, who never complained, who accepted punishment without bitterness, now struggled even to stand. Jane stayed by her side whenever she could, offering what little warmth and companionship she had. In Helen's presence, Jane felt both grounded and restless, drawn to her serenity, yet unwilling to surrender her own fierce sense of justice. One night, long after the lamps were extinguished, Jane rose from her bed. She crossed the cold floor barefoot, her heart pounding, knowing she risked punishment. But fear could not keep her away. Helen lay in the infirmary, her breath shallow, her eyes bright with fever. When she saw Jane, she smiled. "You came," Helen whispered. "I will not leave you," Jane replied, her voice breaking. They spoke quietly in the dark. Helen spoke of peace, of heaven, of rest beyond suffering. Jane listened, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She did not fully understand Helen's faith, but she understood her love. As dawn approached, Helen's voice faded. She died with Jane holding her hand, the loss cut deep. For the first time, Jane experienced grief untempered by anger. Helen's death left a silence within her, a space where reflection grew. Jane did not abandon her sense of justice, but it softened, shaped by compassion and awareness. Spring eventually came. With it arrived change. An outbreak of illness exposed the cruelty of Lode's conditions. Investigations followed. Mr. Brocklehurst's authority weakened. Reforms were introduced: better food, warmer clothing, improved care. Jane survived. She grew. Years passed quietly. Jane became a diligent student, then a teacher. Knowledge became her refuge. Discipline, once imposed, became internal. She learned not only lessons of grammar and geography, but of resilience and self-respect. Lode no longer felt like a prison, but it was never home. Jane knew, even as she stood at the classroom window watching the sky stretch endlessly beyond the hills, that her life was meant to be larger than these walls. She wanted movement, purpose, freedom. One evening, on impulse born of long-contained longing, Jane placed an advertisement seeking a position as a governess. When the response arrived, sealed and promising opportunity, Jane felt something stir within her once more, not fear, not anger, but anticipation. Lode had shaped her. It had tested her endurance, refined her morals, and introduced her to loss. But now, Jane Eyre was ready to step beyond suffering and into mystery. The carriage rocked gently as Jane peered out through the window, the landscape of northern England passing in a blur of muted greens and browns. She felt a strange mixture of excitement and anxiety. After the austere discipline of Lode, life outside those walls was an unfamiliar freedom. Thornfield Hall, she had heard, was a grand house, a place where the echoes of wealth and history lingered in every corner. Yet Jane, with her quiet humility and guarded heart, approached it with the wary curiosity of one who had known too many harsh realities. The carriage came to a stop, and Jane stepped onto the gravel path, her small hands gripping the folds of her plain dress. The front of Thornfield Hall rose before her like a dark sentinel, its windows gleaming faintly in the afternoon light. There was a mysterious air about it, as though the house itself watched her arrival, measuring her worth silently. "Miss Eyre," a voice broke the quiet, warm and steady. Jane turned to see a tall, dignified man in a servant's livery bowing slightly. "I am Mr. Fairfax, the steward. Mr. Rochester awaits you in the drawing room." Jane's heart fluttered. The name she had heard spoken in polite circles, the master of this vast estate, now seemed like a distant echo drawn closer by fate. She followed Mr. Fairfax through long corridors adorned with faded portraits, each figure gazing down with the silent dignity of history. The walls, lined with tapestries and rich wood, seemed to hum with secrets, yet Jane felt no fear, only an acute awareness that life beyond Lode could be as complex and unpredictable as her own heart. Finally, she reached the drawing room, a large space with tall windows and soft, shadowed corners. Mr. Rochester stood near the fireplace, his back partially turned. He was a man of imposing presence, dark hair, keen eyes, and a strong jaw that hinted at both authority and hidden emotion. Yet beneath that stern exterior, Jane sensed a vulnerability, as if life itself had etched unseen lines of sorrow upon him. "Miss Eyre," he said at last, turning toward her. His voice was firm but not unkind. "You have journeyed far." "Yes, sir," Jane replied, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "I am grateful for your hospitality." Rochester's eyes studied her closely. There was a curiosity in his gaze, as if he were searching for a truth beneath the surface, something that could not be discerned in polite conversation. Jane, accustomed to scrutiny and judgment, met his gaze without fear. She had learned, through years of neglect and hardship, that dignity was not a matter of wealth or birth. It was a matter of bearing oneself honestly in the world. "You will find Thornfield quite unlike the schools you have known," Rochester said, his tone carrying a faint trace of amusement. "It is a place of freedom, but freedom has its own demands." Jane inclined her head. She understood, perhaps more than he imagined, that freedom required courage, a strength of mind and heart that was forged through trial. The household was welcoming, though discreet. Mrs. Fairfax, a kindly woman of mature years, guided Jane through her new quarters, a modest room that overlooked the gardens, with a small desk and a bed neatly made, the linens crisp and fresh. "I hope you find comfort here," Mrs. Fairfax said gently. "Thornfield can feel imposing at first, but its walls hold warmth if one knows where to look." Jane's eyes swept the room. The sunlight caught the edges of the curtains and the polished surface of the desk, illuminating the quiet elegance of the space. She allowed herself a brief smile. After years of austere existence, a place of safety, however small, was a treasure. Days passed, and Jane settled into her duties as governess to Adele Varens, a lively and imaginative child. Adele's world was one of music and stories, a delicate contrast to the strict moral rigidity of Lode. Jane guided her with patience, encouraging her curiosity while maintaining gentle discipline. It was in these moments of teaching, of shared discovery and laughter, that Jane began to feel the stirrings of a new life, one in which her mind and spirit could flourish. Yet Thornfield was not without its mysteries. At times, Jane would hear footsteps echoing in the halls at odd hours, or catch glimpses of shadowy figures moving beyond the windows. The staff spoke in hushed tones, their eyes flickering towards certain rooms as if aware of secrets that could not be spoken aloud. Jane's curiosity was piqued, but she remained cautious. She had learned that some truths revealed themselves only in time, and then there was Mr. Rochester himself. Their encounters, initially formal and restrained, began to take on a subtle intimacy. He would question her about books she had read, comment on her observations of the world, and at rare moments allow a flicker of humor to soften his stern demeanor. Jane, though careful to maintain her propriety, felt an unspoken connection growing, a bond not of social standing, but of minds and hearts recognizing one another across the gulf of circumstance. One evening, as the twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Jane walked the garden paths alone. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of earth and fallen leaves. She paused near a fountain, listening to the gentle trickle of water, and allowed herself a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the gravel path. Turning, she saw Mr. Rochester approaching, his expression unreadable yet calm. "Miss Eyre," he said softly, "you seem contemplative this evening." "I was merely admiring the garden, sir," Jane replied, her voice steady though her heart quickened. He nodded, and for a moment they walked in companionable silence. Then he spoke again with a tone that hinted at both curiosity and challenge. "You have an uncommon mind, Miss Eyre. I trust that Thornfield will not diminish it, but perhaps in its own way encourage it to grow." Jane met his gaze, understanding the unspoken weight of his words. Thornfield was a place of contrasts, beauty and shadow, freedom and secrecy, laughter and sorrow. And within its walls she sensed the stirrings of a life that could be her own, shaped not by circumstance but by choice. As night descended, Jane returned to her room, her thoughts alive with possibilities. The house was silent, yet the quiet held its own kind of music, the rhythm of a life unfolding, slowly revealing its secrets. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, aware that the path ahead would not be simple. There would be challenges, moments of doubt, and perhaps sorrow. Yet she felt a flicker of hope, a quiet conviction that she could face whatever lay ahead with integrity and courage. Thornfield Hall, for all its grandeur and mystery, had become more than a dwelling. It was a stage upon which the next chapter of Jane's life would unfold. Here, she would encounter friendship, challenge, and the complex stirrings of the heart. And though the shadows lingered in its corridors, Jane, with her steadfast spirit, was ready to meet them, not with fear, but with the quiet determination that had carried her through all her trials. By the candlelight of her modest room, Jane whispered a promise to herself. She would remain true to her convictions, guard her dignity, and face life with courage, no matter what secrets Thornfield might conceal. In the hush of that first night, she felt the beginning of a life that was uniquely hers, a life of resilience, discovery, and perhaps unexpected love. The days at Thornfield Hall had grown warmer, yet the air often carried a strange, brooding weight, as though the house itself harbored secrets in its walls. Jane moved through the corridors with her usual quiet diligence, attending to Adele's lessons and her governess duties, yet her thoughts frequently wandered to Mr. Rochester. There was a peculiar fascination in his presence, an intensity in his eyes that unsettled her, yet drew her near as if by some invisible thread. He was no ordinary master. His temper could be sudden, sharp, and commanding, yet beneath it lay a depth of understanding and a rare tenderness, glimpsed only when he thought no one observed. Jane had begun to discern the layers of his character slowly, his pride, his restless intellect, and the subtle melancholy that shadowed his expression. In moments of unguarded conversation, his voice softened, revealing a man who had endured much, who had known sorrow and disappointment, yet still dared to seek connection. One autumn afternoon, the wind whispered along the trees outside, and the skies over Thornfield were a muted gray. Jane had been reading with Adele in the drawing room when Mr. Rochester entered unexpectedly. He paused, observing her with a faint, knowing smile. "Miss Eyre," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that startled her. "Do you not find the study of the mind as important as the embellishment of the intellect?" Jane looked up from her book, her heart quickening at the question, for she sensed in it more than mere curiosity. It was a test, a subtle probe into her spirit. "I believe, sir, that the mind must be cultivated with care, much as the garden is tended, patiently with thought and attention, so that each part may flourish." Rochester's smile deepened. "Well said, Miss Eyre. You possess both sensibility and firmness." Many a lady in the drawing rooms of London might envy such qualities, though they might disguise them behind flattery and artifice. Jane's cheeks warmed, but she held his gaze steadily, meeting it with the honesty and resolve that had always defined her. Their conversations were rare and cautious, yet they seemed to carve a space apart from the world, a private understanding neither fully acknowledged. Yet Thornfield was not merely a house of civility and conversation. Shadows lingered in its corners. Strange laughter sometimes echoed through empty halls, and servants whispered of odd occurrences that Jane never fully understood. Mrs. Fairfax, the housekeeper, was a kind woman, but even she seemed touched by unease, speaking in hushed tones about the peculiar ways of the house at night. Jane, though cautious, felt a thrill in the mystery, a sense that life here was richer, deeper, and more dangerous than anything she had known. It was in this atmosphere of subtle tension that Jane began to notice the changing nature of her feelings. She found herself observing Mr. Rochester with a mixture of admiration and apprehension, noting the way his presence could command a room, how his laughter, when rare, lit the corners of Thornfield with a fleeting warmth. And yet she could not deny the shadow of uncertainty that accompanied him. His eyes often held thoughts he did not voice, and his silences were as heavy as his words. One evening, as the candlelight flickered against the walls of the drawing room, Jane was startled to find Mr. Rochester lingering near the window. His face, usually so composed, seemed troubled. "Is there something on your mind, sir?" Jane asked gently, her voice almost a whisper. He turned to her, the corners of his mouth twitching as if in reluctant amusement. "Perhaps," he admitted. "I am a man of many moods, Miss Eyre, and it is often difficult to discern the proper course between impulse and reason. But you have a way of seeing through the pretenses, of touching upon truth without fear or hesitation." Jane's pulse quickened. There was something dangerously intimate in his words, a recognition that stirred her courage and apprehension simultaneously. She could not pretend ignorance. She felt an affection for him growing quietly, persistently, like a candle flame protected from drafts. Days passed, and the unease that had haunted Thornfield seemed to deepen. Jane could not shake the feeling that secrets were held behind closed doors, that the master of the house carried burdens he did not reveal. It was during this time that she met a new visitor, a woman whose arrival would soon cast a complicated shadow over her growing attachment to Mr. Rochester. Miss Ingram was elegant, polished, and radiant in the manner of high society. Her presence brought a glittering contrast to the humble quiet of Jane's world. Jane observed her with cautious attention, noting the subtle ways she sought to charm Mr. Rochester, the easy confidence that allowed her to occupy a room without effort. Yet Jane's spirit remained unmoved. She had learned, through hardship and suffering, to measure her worth not by social polish but by integrity and steadfastness. As days turned into weeks, Jane's relationship with Mr. Rochester deepened in private ways. A shared word, a meaningful glance, a quiet walk in the gardens that spoke more than conversation could convey. They began to understand each other through gestures and silences, through small intimacies that the eyes alone could witness. Jane felt her heart tugged toward him with a force she could neither name nor resist, and yet deception lingered. Thornfield's secrets weighed on her mind, and a sense of impending revelation shadowed every moment of happiness. The master's past, hinted at but never fully disclosed, created a tension between desire and prudence. Jane, with all her honesty and clarity, sensed that love here could not exist without confrontation, that the sweetness of companionship might be tempered by the sting of truth. The anticipation of revelation was not idle. One morning, as Jane was arranging Adele's lesson materials, she heard voices approaching the drawing room. Mr. Rochester was speaking with a visitor, and the tone of their conversation carried a weight that made Jane pause. She lingered at the doorway unseen and listened. "It must be done," Mr. Rochester said firmly, though a shadow of unease flickered in his eyes. "I cannot delay any longer. The arrangements are final and the ceremony will proceed." Jane's breath caught. The words were clear, yet their meaning was obscure. She could feel the tension in her chest, a premonition that events were moving faster than she could comprehend. Who was the visitor? What arrangements did he speak of? A sense of dread mingled with curiosity, and she stepped back, silently retreating to her duties, though her mind raced with unanswered questions. Days later, the truth began to unfold. Preparations were underway for a wedding, a formal celebration that Jane had not imagined she would witness. The hall was adorned with flowers, candles flickered in anticipation, and the household moved with an undercurrent of excitement and anxiety. Jane assisted in quiet ways, her heart heavy with unspoken failings, sensing that her connection with Mr. Rochester would be tested in ways she could not yet foresee. The morning of the wedding, Jane walked through the corridors with a strange mixture of hope and apprehension. She carried flowers and arranged them carefully, her thoughts a tumultuous blend of affection, loyalty, and a quiet sense of foreboding. She could not ignore the glances she exchanged with Mr. Rochester, brief yet loaded with meaning. There was an unspoken understanding that this day would reveal more than ceremony, that truth and passion would collide in the quiet moments between ritual and expectation. The ceremony began in the small, candle-lit chapel within Thornfield. Jane, though distant from the main proceedings, watched as Mr. Rochester approached, solemn and composed, yet his eyes briefly sought hers in a fleeting connection that spoke volumes. The air was thick with expectation, the hush of the room punctuated only by the faint rustle of silk and the muted echo of footsteps. And then, in a moment that seemed suspended in time, the revelation occurred. A stranger appeared at the threshold, a voice cried out, and the gathering was thrown into confusion. The carefully constructed ceremony unraveled in an instant. Mr. Rochester's face darkened with a mixture of anger, despair, and resignation. Jane's heart raced as the room filled with shock and whispered speculation. The truth, long hidden, had emerged, and the consequences were immediate and irrevocable. It was a moment that would define the course of Jane's life and test the resilience of her heart. Love, desire, and duty clashed with deception, honor, and the rigid constraints of society. Jane stood quietly observing the chaos, understanding that her feelings, however deep, must now contend with reality. Her affection for Mr. Rochester had not faltered, yet the circumstances demanded courage, clarity, and a steadfast adherence to principle. As the day ended, Jane withdrew to the quiet sanctuary of her room. She sat by the window, gazing out at the fading light that painted Thornfield in soft shades of amber and gold. The events of the day replayed in her mind, each detail etched with vivid intensity. And yet, despite the turmoil, a strange sense of peace settled over her. She understood that life's trials were not merely to be endured, but to be met with integrity, and that love, when genuine, demanded not only passion but wisdom. Mr. Rochester, though burdened by scandal and secrecy, had revealed his vulnerability in ways that touched Jane's spirit deeply. She recognized that the path forward would be difficult, fraught with uncertainty, yet rich with the possibility of truth and reconciliation. In that quiet moment, she resolved to meet the challenges before her with the strength that had carried her through orphaned childhood and harsh schooling, a strength tempered by compassion, intelligence, and an unwavering sense of self. The night descended upon Thornfield, and Jane felt the house itself exhale in quiet resignation. Shadows lingered and secrets remained, but a new understanding had taken root, that love was never simple, and that the heart's desires must often navigate treacherous waters. Yet in that understanding lay hope, a fragile yet enduring light that would guide Jane through the trials ahead. In the stillness, Jane closed her eyes briefly, feeling the pulse of life and emotion within her. She was no longer merely a governess, no longer merely a passive observer of events. She had tasted the complexities of affection and deceit, of power and vulnerability, and had emerged with her spirit intact. The road ahead would demand courage, discernment, and an unwavering moral compass, but Jane Eyre was no stranger to challenge. And so, as the wind whispered through the corridors of Thornfield and the last embers of candlelight flickered into darkness, Jane felt the quiet stirrings of resolve and hope. Love in all its imperfection had touched her life, and though deception had marred the present, truth and strength would shape her future. The wind whistled through the trees like a mournful sigh, echoing the turmoil in Jane's heart. She walked steadily along the rugged path, the coarse ground beneath her boots reminding her of the harsh reality she had chosen. Thornfield, with its grandeur and its shadows, had become a prison of quiet desperation, and she knew she could not remain within its walls any longer. The evening air was cold and sharp, and yet the freedom of the open country, even under the dim gray sky, felt like a balm to her spirit. Every step she took carried her further from a love that had once seemed a sanctuary and closer to the uncharted territories of her own resilience. Jane had loved Mr. Rochester, truly and with all the fervor of her young heart. But love alone, she had come to realize, could not demand the sacrifice of her moral integrity. The secret she had uncovered, the truth of his marriage, hidden behind the very walls that had promised happiness, had shattered her illusions. She had lingered for a moment, tempted by the warmth of what could have been, yet she had turned away, choosing the cold clarity of conscience over the comfort of passion. In that choice, Jane felt the awakening of her own strength, the slow but steady recognition that she could survive and even flourish without dependence on another's favor or fortune. Night began to fall as she approached the outskirts of a small village, its cottages clustered together like timid birds huddling against the coming dark. Hunger gnawed at her, and her feet ached from long hours of walking, yet she pressed forward. Pride and poverty, she reflected bitterly, had a peculiar way of mingling. The one urged her to continue without appeal, while the other reminded her of her fragility. She could not ask for help, not yet. The world was vast and indifferent, and she was but a solitary traveler navigating its expanse. She came upon a modest inn, its windows glowing with the promise of warmth. She paused, hesitant, yet the weariness in her bones compelled her forward. Inside, the air was fragrant with wood smoke and the comforting aroma of a simple stew. Jane approached the innkeeper, a middle-aged woman with keen eyes softened by a gentle smile. She offered Jane a humble bed for the night and a bowl of broth. Jane accepted with gratitude, masking the turmoil within with a quiet composure that had become her armor. As she sat by the fire, the events of recent weeks replayed in her mind like a theater of sorrow and revelation. Thornfield had been a place of contradictions, opulent and mysterious, warm and yet shadowed by secrets. Her employment there had given her purpose, yet the knowledge she had gained of Mr. Rochester's hidden life had stripped the beauty from it. She remembered the moments of kindness, the glimpses of affection, and even the brief, tender glances that had promised more than mere civility. But behind all of it lay a reality she could neither ignore nor forgive. To stay would have been to betray herself, to leave was to embrace uncertainty. Yet uncertainty, she realized, carried with it the seed of freedom. The next morning, Jane rose before dawn. The village was quiet, bathed in the pale light of early winter, and the chill in the air roused her senses. She purchased a small loaf of bread and some cheese, enough to sustain her for the day, and set off again, guided more by instinct than by any clear plan. Each step was deliberate, a testament to her determination. She moved with a purpose that belied her small frame and gentle demeanor. The landscape stretched out before her in muted shades of brown and gray, fields lying fallow, trees stripped of their foliage, and the distant hills shrouded in mist. It was a lonely world, yet it was hers to navigate. By midday, Jane found herself in a forested area, the canopy above her thick with interlacing branches. The air was still, the silence profound. She paused to rest against the trunk of an ancient oak, its bark rough beneath her fingers. She thought of the friends she had lost, the home she had been denied, and the love she had relinquished. Yet within the sorrow there was a nascent pride. She was alone, yes, but she was free. She could choose the terms of her existence, even if the choices were fraught with hardship. There was dignity in independence, she told herself, and dignity, she understood, could sustain the spirit even when the body was weary. As evening approached, Jane stumbled upon a small cottage, smoke curling from its chimney. She knocked gently, uncertain of her welcome. An elderly woman opened the door, her expression softening at the sight of Jane's worn and travel-stained appearance. The woman, introducing herself as Mrs. Miller, offered her shelter for the night and a warm meal. Jane accepted, grateful for the unexpected kindness. As she ate, the flickering candlelight cast shadows across the room, and she reflected on the stark contrasts of her life. Love had offered warmth, yet it had been conditional. Solitude was harsh, yet it brought freedom. Days passed in a rhythm dictated by necessity rather than desire. Jane found work where she could, tidying houses, teaching children in small homes, and performing tasks that required diligence rather than elegance. Each opportunity, humble as it was, nourished her spirit. She earned her own living, made her own choices, and discovered a resilience that had previously lain dormant. She learned that self-respect was worth more than comfort, that independence was a treasure no wealth could rival. The solitude that once frightened her became a companion, a mirror reflecting the strength she had always possessed. Yet even in the midst of her newfound independence, Jane's heart was not without longing. Memories of Thornfield, of Mr. Rochester, and of the brief, luminous moments they had shared lingered in quiet corners of her mind. But those memories no longer dictated her actions. They were fragments of a past she had honored and left behind. She had learned, painfully but surely, that attachment could be perilous when it demanded the surrender of one's principles. She carried the warmth of past affection in her heart, tempered by the clarity of self-knowledge. One day, while walking along a narrow country road, Jane came across a group of children, huddled together, their laughter mingling with the crisp wind. Their innocence and joy stirred something within her. She paused, offering them a kind word and a gentle smile. The children responded with delight, and Jane realized that teaching, guiding, and nurturing others was a path she could pursue without compromising her integrity. It was work that required patience, compassion, and intelligence, qualities she possessed in abundance. She felt, for the first time in months, a sense of purpose that was wholly her own. Her journey eventually led her to a small town where she found lodgings with a kindly family who employed her as a governess. The children were lively and inquisitive, and Jane discovered that in guiding them, she also cultivated her own growth. Each day brought challenges, but also moments of quiet triumph. The children learned from her, and she in turn learned from them. The simple satisfaction of honest work, of earning her place in the world through effort rather than proximity to wealth, became a steady comfort. Her heart, once shattered by love and disappointment, began to heal in the rhythm of daily life and the companionship of those who depended on her guidance. Jane's letters from distant acquaintances arrived sporadically, carrying news of the wider world but never mentioning Thornfield. She realized that she had entered a new chapter of her life, one unanchored from the shadows of the past. The sorrow that had once defined her existence gradually softened into reflection. She did not deny the depth of her emotions, nor did she attempt to diminish the intensity of her experiences. Instead, she acknowledged them, allowing each memory to take its place in the mosaic of her identity. She understood, stronger for having loved and lost, wiser for having faced betrayal, and freer for having chosen integrity over comfort. Winter gave way to spring, and with it came a quiet renewal. Jane walked through fields bright with wildflowers, the scent of earth and blossom mingling in the gentle breeze. She paused to watch the sunlight filter through the leaves, casting patterns on the ground that seemed almost like a silent benediction. She felt a profound connection to the world around her, a recognition that life, in its endless cycles of joy and sorrow, offered the opportunity for growth, resilience, and renewal. She had endured loss, yet she had not been defeated. She had chosen herself, and in doing so had discovered a strength that no adversity could diminish. The memory of Mr. Rochester remained, a distant and bittersweet echo of what might have been, but Jane no longer felt the need to dwell on it. She had made her choice, and it had been the right one. Love, she realized, could never justify the surrender of self-respect or moral duty. Her heart, once fragile and dependent, had grown firm and resolute. She understood now that independence was not mere solitude, but the freedom to live in accordance with one's principles, to act with integrity, and to embrace life on one's own terms. As Jane prepared for bed each night, she felt a quiet satisfaction in her achievements, small though they might have seemed to the world. She had weathered storms of emotion and circumstance, emerging not unscathed, but stronger, wiser, and more self-assured. She knew that the road ahead would continue to hold challenges, but she welcomed them with a calm determination. She had chosen a life of honesty, dignity, and purpose, and that choice, she understood, was the foundation upon which all true happiness must be built. In this chapter of her life, Jane Eyre had learned the most profound lessons of all. That self-respect is the truest form of wealth, that independence carries with it a quiet but unshakable power, and that even in the face of loss, the human spirit is capable of renewal. She had embraced solitude not as punishment but as a crucible for growth, and in doing so had discovered the enduring strength that would carry her through all the trials yet to come. Her journey was far from over, but Jane walked it with the confidence of one who knew herself, who valued her principles above transient comfort, and who recognized that the essence of life was not in the ease of circumstance, but in the courage to remain true to one's own heart. Thornfield had been a place of beauty and darkness, love and deception, but Jane had emerged from it unbroken, carrying within her the quiet, steadfast light of independence, a light that would guide her through every shadowed path yet to be trodden. The days that followed my arrival at Moor House passed in a quiet rhythm, a rhythm that slowly stitched together the tattered edges of my existence. I felt the firm yet gentle pulse of life here, the hum of diligence and kindness in every room, and I clung to it as if it were a tether to sanity after the chaos I had fled. In those first moments, I had felt nothing but the sharp, aching emptiness of loss, the cold echo of my sorrow, the desolate void where love had once lived. But now, even in my solitude, I could feel warmth creeping back, a subtle reassurance that life could still hold moments of beauty. St. John Rivers, whose demeanor was always austere, became a steady presence in my days. There was a gravitas about him that impressed itself upon me, a sense of unwavering purpose that both challenged and inspired. He treated me as an equal in intellect and in conviction, demanding thought, reflection, and moral discernment at every turn. And though his devotion to duty often seemed almost unyielding, I could see the quiet strength in his belief that one could shape a life with principle. Yet it was not affection I sought in him, it was guidance, a mirror in which to see my own growing self-respect and resolve. Mary and Diana Rivers, St. John's gentle sisters, welcomed me with a softness that contrasted their brother's sternness. Their presence was like sunlight filtered through a pale curtain, warm, diffused, comforting. We shared small conversations over tea, the clinking of delicate porcelain a soothing refrain in the otherwise measured silence of Moor House. They asked questions with genuine curiosity, listened with patient attentiveness, and in their company I found a small but steadfast home. Life, however, has a way of pulling one back to the past, even when the present offers refuge. I could not entirely erase Thornfield Hall from my mind, the shadowed corridors, the quiet, deliberate presence of Mr. Rochester, and the strange, uneasy tension that had always surrounded him. My heart, though scarred by loss and humiliation, could not help but remember. The memory was a living thing, neither fully painful nor fully comforting, but persistent and insistent. I wrestled with it privately, afraid to let even the Rivers sisters glimpse the turmoil that stirred beneath my calm exterior. It was during one of these reflective days that news arrived, news that tore the fabric of my calm existence and hurled me into a storm of anxiety and hope alike. Mr. Rochester had been injured. A fire at Thornfield Hall had left the house in ruin. In the blaze, he had lost more than possessions, and rumors suggested that he had been grievously wounded, his sight possibly impaired. The news reached me like a clarion call, igniting every dormant sentiment I had tried to suppress. All thought of caution, of propriety, of self-preservation was swept away. The moment I heard of his plight, a single, unyielding desire rose within me. I must see him, I must be near him. The journey to Thornfield, or what remained of it, was arduous. The countryside stretched like a muted tapestry of greens and browns, each mile carrying me closer to a home I barely recognized, yet could not forget. My mind raced with memories, the first meeting, the quiet conversations, the moments of tentative understanding, and the terrifying revelation of his secret. I was not naive. I knew the obstacles that had once stood between us were formidable, yet in that moment my resolve hardened. Love, tempered by patience and fortified by suffering, had become a choice, not a whim. When I finally reached him, the sight was both heart-wrenching and profoundly relieving. Thornfield Hall lay in ruin, charred timbers and blackened stone testifying to the devastation. Amidst the wreckage, I found him changed, yes, but unmistakably himself. The strong, commanding presence that had so often unsettled me now bore the marks of humility and suffering. He was scarred, one hand maimed, his gaze partially veiled by the loss of sight in one eye, yet he stood with a courage that spoke of survival and endurance. I could not restrain my tears. They flowed freely, unashamedly, as I approached him. "Jane," he whispered, his voice hoarse yet filled with recognition. Even in his weakened state, there was a power in his presence, an intensity that reached straight to my heart. I could see the relief in his eyes, the profound gratitude for my return, and the unspoken question that hung between us. Could what had been broken ever be made whole again? I took his hand, careful not to startle him, and felt the calluses and scars that told their own story of suffering and resilience. "Edward," I said softly, using the name that had always been reserved for moments of intimacy. "You are alive, that is what matters, nothing else matters now." He smiled faintly, a gesture both wistful and brave. "Alive, thanks to you, perhaps. Jane, I feared all was lost, not the house, not possessions, but the hope that you would ever come to me." His words were heavy with regret, yet they carried a tenderness that seemed almost sacred in their simplicity. The days that followed were a careful negotiation between recovery and revelation. Thornfield, though in ruins, had been restored in part by devoted servants who had remained loyal. and temporary arrangements allowed us to exist in quiet, measured comfort. Each day we spoke openly with an honesty born from suffering. He shared his regrets, his mistakes, his pride, and I shared mine, the times I had faltered, the doubts I had carried, and the strength I had cultivated in absence. There was no pretense between us. We were two souls laid bare, meeting not in grandeur, but in shared understanding and enduring respect. Our conversations often wandered to future possibilities. Marriage, once a dream tinged with impossibility, now appeared as a tangible, carefully considered choice. Yet it was not simply affection that drew us together, it was equality. In each other we had found a companion who could both challenge and cherish, who could both light and follow, who could both need and nurture. This balance, delicate yet undeniable, was the cornerstone upon which we began to rebuild our shared life. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the skeletal remains of Thornfield, we sat together, the warmth of the hearth a gentle counterpoint to the chill of the autumn air. His hand found mine once more, and he spoke with a gravity that seemed almost ceremonial. "Jane, I have asked much of you in the past. I have demanded your understanding, your forgiveness, and your patience. Will you give me one more thing, the chance to be the man worthy of you?" I looked into his eyes, seeing not the proud, commanding figure I had once known, but a man tempered by suffering, humbled and renewed. "Edward," I said, my voice steady yet soft, "the man you are now, the man who stands before me, scarred yet unbroken, he is the man I have always waited for. I choose you not out of need, nor out of fear, but out of love and conviction. I choose you because I see your soul as you see mine, and together we are whole." A fragile, hopeful smile spread across his face, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I sensed the quiet, enduring promise of happiness. It was not a happiness built on ease or luxury, but on shared trials, mutual respect, and unwavering devotion. In that moment, the past's shadows seemed to recede, leaving only the light of a present carefully claimed and a future consciously chosen. The days turned into weeks, and in the steady rhythm of recovery, we discovered the profound joy of ordinary moments. We walked through the scarred gardens, now beginning to bloom again with the stubborn insistence of life. We read together in the quiet afternoons, the words of distant authors offering new insight and gentle amusement. And we simply existed side by side, each aware of the other's presence, each finding solace in the silent reassurance that came with true companionship. Through it all, the memory of my own trials, the lonely corridors of Gateshead, the harsh lessons of load, the isolation of self-imposed exile, remained with me. Yet instead of bitterness, these recollections now offered clarity. They had forged resilience, discernment, and an unshakable moral compass. They had shown me the depth of my own strength, the value of compassion, and the enduring power of choice. And in Edward's presence, I discovered that love, when founded on equality and respect, could transform rather than consume, could nurture rather than diminish. At last, the time came when we spoke of formalizing our union, of committing to a life shared in every sense. The conversation was quiet, devoid of grand declarations or ostentatious promises, for we had learned that love is not measured by words alone, but by the constancy of action, the gentleness of intent, and the unwavering presence through trials both great and small. "Jane," he said one morning, as the first pale light of winter touched the window, "let us no longer be two wandering souls, uncertain and incomplete. Let us bind our lives together with the knowledge that neither power nor pride can divide us again." And so, with the quiet solemnity that suited our lives, we took the first steps toward a future neither of us had dared imagine in our youth, yet which now seemed inevitable and profoundly right. Our love, tempered by separation and trial, was not the naive, impulsive sentiment of first attraction, but a deliberate, conscious choice, the fruit of experience, reflection, and enduring respect. It was a love that would not falter in the face of adversity, for it had been tested by suffering and refined by patience. As I sat by the window that evening, watching the last light fade behind the bare branches of Thornfield's garden, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. The journey had been arduous, the road fraught with hardship, yet every step had led me here, to this moment of quiet triumph, of chosen love, of hard-earned serenity. Life, I realized, is not measured merely by joy or sorrow, but by the strength with which one rises after every fall, by the clarity with which one makes one's choices, and by the courage to love wholly without compromise or fear. In Edward's presence, I understood that home is not a place, nor is it simply comfort. Home is the heart that recognizes and values another, the hand that steadies in darkness, the voice that offers reassurance without demand. And in this chosen home, in the quiet strength of mutual respect and love, I found the fulfillment that had once seemed so distant and unattainable. Thus our lives began anew, not in grand opulence, nor in careless delight, but in steady, deliberate companionship. We faced the future with eyes unclouded by illusion, hearts tempered by past suffering, and spirits fortified by the certainty of choice. And in the calm, measured rhythm of shared existence, we discovered a happiness that was neither fleeting nor fragile, but enduring, resilient, and profoundly ours.